Beep. What is up, ninjas? My name is Sam Rold and I make music production and sound design videos for dance music here on YouTube, and this is my 6-inch mic, Steve.
Hello.
Now in today's video, we're going to discuss how to master a tech house track, and in order to do this, we're going to be using one of my own tracks, which is a collab with a fellow follower by the name of XY that we got signed on to Groove Basement, which is a pretty decent tech house label. Now we're going to be using this track as I did the master for it that made the final cut, and we're going to talk a little bit about the reasoning and what went into the master. Now obviously I'm not Lucas Pristoli mastering engineer level, but I do feel like you can learn from anyone, so hopefully when watching this video you guys learn a couple of things that you can use in your own mastering chain. However, I will say this: please do not copy the mastering chain and get all the details right to the specification, as again, every track is different just like any other human being, and doing these kind of things on someone might not work on someone else, if you know what I mean. With that being said, if you want to support the channel, make sure to head over to evilsounds.com where you can find all of my sound design work. That is how I feed my family and my kids. And best of all, there's a new sound bank out now called Paradox Volume 3 for the people making techno or anyone that wants to incorporate the techno sound into tech house. Make sure to check it out. And with that being said, let's get started with this video. So the first thing we must discuss is what's the point of a master. Now for many people, doing a master means putting as many limiters as you can and getting all the way to negative 6.9 LUFS, which I believe is a great number, and it's what I aim for in my masters as well. However, there's a lot more that goes into the master, as this is going to be the last step before it starts to penetrate your listeners' ears. So just like you get ready for any date, you want to make sure that your track is looking as best as it can. So the master is where preferably you're going to get a second set of ears that's going to listen to your track and tell you how bad it is and how you need to change the kick or the lead, etc. Now this is a very important step of the mastering process, but when you decide to do the master yourself, obviously you don't have a second set of ears, so the best you can do is grab your mate, get him some beer, get him a little drunk so that he enjoys your music and you get the confidence boost you need to master it. With that aside, let's get into a couple of things that you need to be doing for your master. Number one, I'm a big proponent in teaching people to make sure that their track is hitting and peaking around -6, because you're going to want a bit of headroom in order to work your magic with the master. For instance, here we're going to have the break of the song and it's going to be playing.
Can I ask you, was it something I did? Still I wonder, 'cause it isn't too clear.
Now, if you notice in the breakdown, we're kind of averaging around -12 to -6. So the peaks are going to hit at -6. That means for a split second, it gets all the way up there. But average wise, we can say it's around -12 dB, which is good because we have a lot of headroom in order to mess this up and hit to 0 dB. From there, we're going to check the drop as well. And what my hope is for the drop to be a little louder than the break. And again, when you're mixing your track, when you're working on your track, this is what you want: proper leveling, and you want the track to sound half decent. Now let's check the drop real quick.
Can I ask you?
Okay, so as you can see, there is a bit of headroom for us to work our little magic and turn this ugly duckling into Cinderella. And that's the point. You want to set yourself up for success with that. And the reason that we're going to be doing this is because in the master, again, we're going to be shifting, shaping with EQ if needed. We're going to be adding a bit of saturation if needed. Now, all of these things, assuming that you're boosting with the EQ, is going to add volume. And again, you just want to be clean about it. You don't want to be the guy peaking at 0 dB before the master even hits. All right, guys, now in the mastering chain for this track, they got accepted to Groove Basement. What I decided to start off with was an Ozone Imager. Now, a lot of the times it's way cleaner to do imaging in the track, and I did do it in the mixing stages. However, a lot of the times you might run into the issue of like, maybe I want to accentuate certain things. So this is where the imager stands. Now, if you don't know anything about stereo shaping or stereo imaging, the best basic way I can put this is assume here I have a mid-side EQ and I get rid of the side signal. This is my mid signal, or my mono if you want to say it that way, but the right way to say it is mid.
Can I ask you?
Notice how it's all coming from the center if you're listening on monitors, and in headphones, it might also sound like it's coming from the center. Now, from there, we're going to have the side signal. Now, the side signal is going to be wide. Okay, so with knowing how that sounds like, pretty much you can kind of safely say that when we're using the Ozone Imager, we're either trying to narrow something or certain frequency band down more or expand it more into the sides, okay? That's the whole purpose of the Ozone Imager. Now, if you're trying to widen the crap out of certain things here, no, do it in the mixing stages. However, if you're just trying to add a bit of accentuation, then I think it's totally fine. Okay, so the first thing is there's a band here that's going to be set. You can double click to set it. And pretty much it's going to be everything below 200 hertz. Now, everything below 200 for me, always in mono, and that's just my personal preference. Some people make it wide. I never think it sounds good in my masters personally, and I like everything to sound super tight, especially the low end, and usually this is the way to do it. So pretty much everything below that for me is always going to be put really down to 100. You can definitely put it at around 30, 40. Use your ears, of course, and what you feel. But for me, this is always something that must be done if, again, you're dabbling with sounds that are really wide around this frequency side.
Can I ask you?
From there, we're going to have the mids. Now, depending on the track, you can definitely get creative with this. For instance, let's say that I wanted the mids to sound really wide. I can increase the width like so.
Can I ask you?
Notice that when I increase it to 100%, pretty much the vocal is the one noticeable thing that gets spread out.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you? Can I ask you? Can I ask you?
So from there, you might decide to do something. Now, again, if you can do it in the track, it's a lot cleaner. So here, usually it's very minuscule changes. The mids get monoed a bit because obviously as I did that, it sounded a lot better.
Can I ask you?
Okay, so now in theory, usually what's the most popular thing to do with the imager, and this is the more basic thing if you just want to go with that, it's going to be the lower the frequencies, usually the more mid they are, and then the higher, the more wide you can get, it sounds a lot more pleasing, okay? So from there, you can kind of see the stairs, as I like to call them. We're going up the stairs. Usually the low end's going to be mid heavy, mono heavy. Again, we're talking about stereo imaging here. And as we move to the right, you're allowed to widen a bit. So again, very basic and it's kept, but you can definitely get super creative with it, of course, as we saw. And if you find that your track increases with this, and that's totally awesome. Now, I do have to put a disclaimer because we do have the smart baba in the chat. Of course, when I put the band to width really high up to 100, it doesn't mean that I'm making stuff wide. Only the stuff that has side information is getting put wide more. If I want to turn a mono or mid material wide, I'm going to have to turn on the sterilize, which can cause a lot of issues, which I usually don't recommend unless you're doing it on a specific sound, because watch, this is what happens.
Can I ask you?
Pretty much it's like a Haas effect in a way, and if you know the Haas effect, personally me, I'm not a huge fan of using it, but again, there's a place for it, but that's why we don't want to do that. So very basic Ozone Imager here. It's just doing a bit of stereo imaging. Again, this is a per DM basis if you did a good job. Now, the stereo imaging usually comes first, and I put it there. I don't have much reasoning behind it other than the fact that I used to have a mastering mentor that would help me, and he always told me put your imaging in the beginning of the master. It could be just a lot of the fact that you want to kind of come in already with the way you want your stuff imaged to process, but again, this is a good question for people to answer in the comments down below if you feel like you know the answer to that. Now, the next thing that I decided to do was use bass room, and this guy is going to be, again, you can think of it as an EQ. So we are EQing with this guy. However, this guy is created by mastering the mix. And one of the biggest things, and I think you guys can relate with me, is that we're super insecure about the low end. You can nail the low end and you can do everything right, but you still feel a little insecure. It's just something that comes from like PTBD, post-traumatic bass disorder, as you always are scared of people saying your bass sucks butt. Okay, but anyways, the way this works is super cool. You can put in reference tracks here. I decided to do two, as you can see. One is called About You by, I believe it's the Sonny Federa, chapter and verse Ashes extended mix, okay? From there, we can highlight parts of the track that we want to reference, and as we do this, we create targets. Once we have our targets created, we can put this on the drop of our track. Let's say probably the busiest part, which would be here.
Can I ask you?
Now, as it does that, you can see there's these like weird outlines over here. The idea is that you can come up to it and have the bar touch like so. And then from there, you're going to see, okay, there, maybe here's too much, as you can see. So we lower that down, lower down here. Again, very basic there. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get the perfect low end, because this is all it's doing is just EQ shaping the low end part of your track. And again, it can destroy your kick as well. But if you have something decent, like you have a good kick, you have a good bass, you did everything right, and you just want that last sort of quality control on your track, like some dude in the back going, it sounds good, son. It's usually the guy smoking weed in the back of the studio, then this bass room is pretty much it. Okay, now I'm not sponsored by Mastering Mix or anything. I just like to use it. So from here, let's just kind of style in what it said.
Can I ask you?
You can see the bass and mainly the bass just gets shaped a little differently. Now, is this cheating? I don't know. I use what I can. You know, don't crucify me. I'm not a master engineer. I'm trying to save some money, but I think it sounds good, and it helped a lot in nailing the kick and bass. Now, if you notice, it's not a big change, and that's what we want. We don't want a big change, because if there's a big change, then oh boy. You definitely ain't using my sound mix and samples, because again, if you know what you're doing, you should be able to get something clean without having to do too much processing with it. Now, the next step of the mastering phase for me in this plugin, and again, I might be putting the plugins order a little off here, but this is going to be the exciter, which is the saturator for the track. Now, saturation is good, and you want to do it as much as you can, because as humans, our ears love colored sound. We like hearing stuff that has been saturated, and we like stuff that does it. The other cool thing about saturation is the key to getting loud and getting mixes that sound exciting and clean. Again, there is a bit of like good work that needs to be put in the mixing, but the saturator in the mastering phase, you're just trying to add that final polish. So for me personally, I know what I have to do with saturation, but I'm gonna be honest, I usually don't know what I want for the track. So this is where presets come in handy, and this is how I like to use presets even when I make music with sound design. I'll just pick random presets until one inspires me. Same thing with the saturator. We're just going thick and fuzzy. Again, one of the issues I had recently when I was showing this to a fellow mate was the track master sounds good, but the highs are a little too harsh. So again, just lowering down the mix on them to where it needs to be, using a second set of ears, which should be done in the mastering phase in my opinion. And then from there, it's as simple as that. We can see that this section, I can overly saturate it. This is what I mean. You can overly saturate the hats. Okay, so we're going to put that very low. And then from there, that's all that was needed. Unsolo that.
Can I ask you?
Now, I feel like as producers, you're watching this and probably going, okay, that did do a change, but it was very minimal and it was slight. But that's the thing. When it comes to mastering and mixing properly, I feel like it's not a sprint race. It's a turtle race. I was trying to sound smart there. But what I mean by that is a lot of times as producers, we're looking for that one plugin that's going to make everything sound good. And sadly, that's not the way stuff works. Now, there is a plugin that might get close to that. But if you're using it to that extent, then you might want to overthink what you're doing as a producer in your mixing. However, again, everything we're doing is very minimal, but that's the idea of it. We're slowly accentuating parts of the track. We're not trying to destroy the track and Botox it. At this point, you know, the way we're doing this is just standard working out rather than getting cosmetic surgery on the track. Okay, so the Ozone Exciter, again, helps us saturate. Now, from there, we're going to move on to the EQ phase. Now, the reason we do the EQ here after the saturation is because if I EQ something and then I saturate afterwards, I can bring those frequencies back in. So the theory is, again, signal flow here. The EQ comes after the saturator for that reason. Now, with the EQ, what we're pretty much trying to do is shape the track frequency based. I don't even know if that exists, those words, but what I'm trying to say is pretty much this is where you have the track and you're going, okay, it's lacking a bit of mids, it's lacking a bit of highs, it's lacking something, and this is where you fix it. Now, if you can go into the mix, even better, but if you're trying to work forward or if you're doing the master for someone else and you only have, again, the master export that they have, and that's all you got to work with in the EQ section, is where you can make pretty much ugly ducklings into beautiful ones, okay? Now with this track, pretty much I found that my mid highs were kind of lacking a bit. That just means 2K to 5K. As you can see, there's going to be a boost here. Now in order to do this, I used the digital V3 from BrainWorx, which is a super cool mid-side EQ. You can kind of say, I guess, mono or stereo. So if you guys remember, we were talking about the imaging part of Ozone. Here we have the mono signal of the EQ.
Can I ask you?
And then we're going to have the stereo section.
Can I ask you?
Now, if you notice, the cool thing about this plugin is that it also places it down the center for you, so you can hear both of them there. So the cool thing is that from there, I can EQ individually if I wanted to. For instance, let's assume here that in the centers where I have the clap and I found that the clap wasn't hitting as hard as I wanted to, then I could use the mono section to target the clap, which I did here, and target the frequency that it lands, which is 2.49K around here. From there, we're going to have our quadrant, which is pretty much how wide we want this gap to be. And if you want a little bit of fun theory, then usually when you're boosting in the master, you want to go with something a little bit broader, and you want to cut with more specific surgical when you're cutting. Okay, so we're going to have a very broad band.
Can I ask you?
So as you can see, the clap comes out a bit more and it slaps a lot harder, which is what the intended purpose of this EQ is. From there, there's also a little bit of a boost on the low end because I thought bass drum wasn't doing me right. And then from there in the stereo section, you can see really nothing is being done. But if I wanted to, I can EQ that without worrying about the mono signal. Let's assume that I wanted to decrease maybe here, then I could do it.
Can I ask you?
Okay, you can also boost in the sides without affecting the mono signal. You hear it as you do it, so that's why I love this EQ a lot for mastering. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm a player when it comes to mastering plugins, as in I don't use the same ones when I do it because I think it's a lot more fun to use all the ones that you've acquired, which you don't really need. All right, guys, my camera decided to die on me, but we're going to continue this party here. Now, the next plugin that we have, and it's the one that I wanted to talk about, is called Gullfoss, which is, I guess we could say, an intelligent AI EQ, which looks at the track as it comes in. And the cool thing about Gullfoss that I really like is the fact that you can use it to tame, again, there's tame right there, a lot of the resonating frequencies that sound harsh. So this is where we use it and put a percentage of how much we want. So for instance,
Can I ask you?
you can see there's little gaps here, but there's also a broad boost that happens with it. So it feels like my track is lacking a bit of high frequencies and whatnot. We can even use it in the break.
Can I ask you? Was it something I did? Still I wonder, 'cause it isn't too quick.
Very easy plugin to use. I can, let's say I'm very confident in my low end and I don't want this ruining low end, and I could do this so the low end isn't altered.
Can I ask you? Was it something I did?
You can have it target the highs of your track if you find something is very harsh up there.
Can I ask you? Was it something I did?
As you can see there. Now, usually the tame, I'm not running it that high. If you are and you find that it's doing wonders for your track, dope, but you might want to rethink maybe some of the stuff that you've been doing in the mix. But from there, just using it slightly to, again, help a little bit with harshness and resonating frequencies. And then from there, a little bit of recover to make up for the frequencies that are getting removed.
Can I ask you? Was it something I did?
From there, you can increase the brightness and the bias, which is going to do things to the plugin that I can't really say, like brighten obviously your highs, but bias from there. Someone can read the manual and tell me. Other than that, Gullfoss is always used on the master. It doesn't hurt to put in. A lot of times it's not causing any harm unless you're using it at really high values. And I always think a master will benefit from it. Okay, so we finally reached the compressor in the master for this track. Now, for you, that might be the beginning of the chain. However, compression is probably I want to say the number one part where most people mess up their masters that are doing it themselves. And the main reason is that they have a lot of questions like how far should I be pushing it? How much gain reduction do I need? Which is signified by the needle here. and from the fact that I don't know where my attack and release settings should be at, etc. And I understand that, guys. I'm not a mastering engineer like that by any means, but I do understand the basics of it. And I feel like if you understand the purpose and the basics of compression, then you should have no issue in setting up a decent compressor for your track on the master, of course. So what's the purpose of compression? If we can answer that, then I think it will become more clear on what you should do. So the point of compression on the master is, one, to create a bit of uniformity. Pretty much it's going to be parts of the track or little sounds in there that are going to be really loud or really quiet at certain spots. So we're trying to create uniformity by controlling that, by lowering down the dynamic range. Anytime you're getting any sort of gain reduction, you're lowering your dynamic range, aka decreasing volume, because we're working from the top to the bottom. We're not working from the bottom to the top. It's from the loudest part down. However, this will let us get louder later on when we start to limit, of course, because you're not going to have sounds jumping out really loud, of course, because the compressor is going to help in taming that. That creates uniformity. From there, the way it does it, you determine with the attack and release settings, which you can find here. And from there, you can either, one, choose to add more sustain by using a lower attack, or choose to add more punch to the track by using a higher attack, or as many would say, a slower attack. Okay, so from there, if you don't know what to do with the release, like I don't, I put it in auto. Now, these values I'm saying, again, these are just tips that many mastering engineers have said in tutorials and videos that keeps popping up and up again. So one of the coolest things you can do is if you use an SSL variant compressor, then just between 1 to 3 is usually where you want to be at. From there, you can experiment with going up to 10 milliseconds. But again, this is probably where you want to be at. I put it a little ahead of the 3 here. Release, I don't know what the hell I want it at, so I put it in auto. Keep it simple. From there, your ratio, you can go with 2 to 1 or 4 to 1. Majority of the time, you're going to be doing 4 to 1. And then from there, your threshold, you just lower it slowly. Now, as I do that, you're definitely going to hear there's a change in the sound. And hopefully what you're hearing is the change in the transients of the track, the way the kick and the clap and the drums are interacting in the song. This is where you're mainly going to hear compression if you're trying to listen for it. Notice how the track sounds, one, glued together because the kick and clap sort of get like sucked into the mix. Again, that's what compression is doing. Now, depending on how I want to shape that, I use the attack for that. For instance, I could go a little higher. And you can see if I go higher with the attack, the clap loses that sound of compression and it becomes a little bit more like dynamic, what we can say. However, this is where you control it. Now, compression, I feel like it's a thing that you feel, like Steve Angelo says, because of the idea that it's very rhythmic and you feel the dynamics of the sound doing that. However, here, again, when in doubt, 1 to 3, it depends on your song. Threshold gain reduction maybe up to 4. You can have the needle dance and go back to 0, be very lenient. But if you're gonna go all the way to like 12 or 16, you better make sure you know what you're doing. And finally, we reach the last phase for many people when it comes to mastering, and that is going to be the limiting phase where you're going to try and get your track loud. Now, usually it's good to come in with a desired LUFS that you're going to be doing. Now, LUFS is just going to be a loudness unit that's going to tell us how loud it's perceived by us. And a lot of the times, most plugins like, limiters will have it. Like pretty much Pro L2 is going to have it here on the right if you set it up. I forgot how I did that. But again, if you don't have that, you can use a metering plugin like Levels or like Insight by Isotope in order to get that, or the free Yulin meter. So from here, once I know that, I usually use 2 limiters when we want to get to anything above -8 LUFS. The reason for that is you want to offset the load. You're pretty much doing serial limiting in order to have the first limiter just catch the peaks, and the second one is going to be the one that pushes it to what we want it to be at. Now, the first limiter, since we're going to be using it for that format, will turn on true peak limiting. Now, there is going to be a oversampling being added here, and the main reason for that is because when we use very short look-ahead times, aka the way that Pro L2 is going to react to incoming signal, incoming peaks, you definitely want the oversampling up. It's going to make the plugin work harder, higher CPU intensive. But I will say, just because you put this oversampling at 8x, 32x doesn't mean it sounds better. Definitely experiment with that, but I decided to go with 4x on that due to that. Now from here, as I'm limiting, I do like to set the 1-to-1, which is the unity gain button. Pretty much as I limit this, it's not going to increase the loudness too much, but it's still going to give me how the limiter is going to sound like on the signal, so that way I can make better educated decisions on what I want to go with. So for example here, we're going to have this set to 7.6, right? So this is how it should sound like at this level. Okay, but if I turn that unity gain button on, it's going to stay quiet. But then you can also hear how the limiter is destroying the track. If I push it really hard, it's still quiet again. So this helps you make decisions knowing that the limiter is not destroying, again, the transients of the track coming in. And I want to preserve it as best as I can. So that's why we use this 1-to-1 in order to do that. So again, all I'm going to do with the gain is go up until the limiter starts catching some of the peaks. Okay, so as we can see there, we're going to have pretty much the peaks caught. And from there, we're going to set this 1-to-1 just to hear how it sounds like. Okay, so once we have it's 1-to-1, we have this. From there, you can start playing with your attack in the release settings in the limiter. So this is going to be in the advanced section here. And again, I recommend you do this. You can definitely use a preset, but it's very easy to kind of execute. Now, one thing you have to realize is the attack and release settings are not going to be exact to what you're putting, because FabFilter Pro Alt-2, we can say, is intelligent. So it really depends on the situation. And Pro Alt-2 is going to pretty much use your settings as sort of a guideline, and then from there, do what it has to do. So with this track, like I was saying, I wanted to preserve a little bit of the transients of the track, and I wanted it to hit. So in order to do this, we use a low release time for that, because the higher the release, the longer the limiter is going to latch on. From there, we are setting a pretty relatively high attack. We're not going lower. Now, higher attack will usually mean that I can get this louder, but the problem is you can also introduce a bit of distortion. So again, attack and release times. From there, we can set our style, which I went with punchy on it just because I wanted to punch your mix. However, don't let the name fool you. Definitely check all of them and go with what sounds best to your ears. But again, for me, punchy was good. From there, a short look ahead, like I said before. So once we have that first limiter set, from there, the second one, I'm not going to lie, I got a little lazy and I didn't want to like program it individually. So I went with a preset called Bring Out the Beat Loud. And then from there, again, this one is just here to try and get it to our desired loudness. So as you saw, the track was relatively around -7 LUFS. It would go down to -6.8 up to -8, which means there's a bit of dynamic range going on, which is good. Track sounds decent. From there, I'll hear it all the way through. And if nothing bothers me, then pretty much the track is done with the mastering and whatnot. Definitely get a second set of ears as well. Now, the last thing I do have to add in this mastering phase here, as you can see at the end, there is a utility. Now, this is a very important part and a part that many people miss, in my opinion, but that's going to be to decrease the volume of the track on the breaks. That is what it's here for. So you're pretty much gain staging it down. The reason we're doing it after the limiter is just due to the fact that, again, if I do it before the limiter, it's still gonna get limited up. So pretty much it's gonna sound like this.
Can I ask you, was it something I did? Still I wonder, 'cause it isn't too clear.
And then as you can see, you can be very specific on where you want it to get loud. So for instance, I do it here. main reason for this, again, is just to make sure the break is quieter than the drop. One of the things people do that I hate is when the buildup is louder than the drop itself. So this is something cool that you can do in order to mitigate that. And finally, guys, this is the last thing I did on this master because XY told me I should try it out. And I thought it sounded pretty cool. And it's actually a pretty clutch thing to do. So pretty much if you have Ozone 9, I believe the suite or what, it's going to have a match EQ. So pretty much you're going to put the plugin on the reference track that you want to use it on. And then you're going to hit capture. From there, you're going to put it on yours and you're going to hit capture and it's going to pretty much compare both. From there, you can add a bit of EQ match to do this. And this was the final step. Now, for this part, I did do two of them, as you can see, that turn off and on for the break and the drop. And the thing with this thing that's cool, in my opinion, is that you can do it. If you find, okay, it sounds good, then leave it. If you don't, then take it off. But it's something cool that you can do. So the breakdown is going to be like this with it.
Can I ask you, was it something I did?
I'm going to take it off.
Still I wonder, cause it isn't too clear. I don't want no trouble, tired of the lies. You found yourself another, heart as cold as ice. I'm trying to recall.
So again, if you're hearing, it's something that's very small, but it helps in just giving it that last final polish. And this was the last thing I added in this master. And again, it's before the limiter. So you can say that's a bit of EQ shaping. And of course, we're going to have one for the drop as well, which is going to happen. Just some last EQ corrections.
Can I ask you?
Again, this one's going to be set to 19%. Now, the cool thing about this thing is that you can definitely use it, but again, it can also do a bit of harm. Like, for instance, this is a master that got accepted. And when I have this on, I do feel like it makes the chord hits a little too thin, maybe too much than I would have liked to. But in exchange, it sounds a little cleaner. So again, it's give and take. But with that being said, guys, I do have to get going. Hopefully you enjoyed this video on me showing the mastering for this track. Again, just keep it simple, have fun with it. And hopefully this video helps give you some ideas. I'll make sure to timestamp it so you guys can go to the section you want, to what you find interesting. And again, watch the video. You might not agree with me on some of the mastering stuff that I did, but if I give you some ideas for you to try out, then cool. And please don't copy the mastering specifically. Try and do something similar to it to get to what you want. But other than that, you guys take care. You guys have a great rest of your day.